Hello and welcome, Adam Gower here. And in today's episode of the Real Estate Crowdfunding Show, Syndication in the Digital Age at gowercrowd.com, I am going to be diving into one of the most exciting aspects of raising capital online for your real estate projects, automated email marketing, with my very special guest, John Oechsle, who is president and CEO at Swiftpage. Now, during the global financial crisis of 2008-2009, I was responsible for selling huge portfolios of distressed real estate, one deal at a time, which involved sending ridiculous amounts of emails. To manage this, I built a system that automated the process. I'd send an email, and if someone responded, they'd automatically get a pre-written response that, if they responded to that, would trigger another pre-written email from me, and etc. Right? It was a primitive system that I built, but it works. And it was through that experience that I learned the sheer power of automating email communications. My guest today, John Oechsle's company, Swiftpage, provides one of the most sophisticated CRM solutions on the planet. And one of the core components of that is their automated email marketing system called ACT. In today's podcast, you're going to hear about how far automated email systems have come since I built mine over 10 years ago, and what they are exactly, and best practices for how to use them. Plus, if you go to the podcast page at gowercrowd.com, you can access the whiteboard workshop that I put together for you that shows you how to build an entire digital marketing system so you can raise money for your real estate projects. And I show you exactly how an automated email marketing system fits into that, right? Oh, by the way, in today's podcast with John, you're also going to learn about email list buying best practices, which is something here at Gower Crowd that we've been exploring very successfully recently. If you're interested in finding out more about that, just go ahead and use the contact page at gowercrowd.com and let me know, and I'll send you some more info. All right, so that's it. Without further ado, I am pleased to introduce you to the president and CEO at Swiftpage, John Oechsle. Right, John, so what a pleasure to meet you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Like I said, we're going to have a lot of fun.
We will, because your side of digital marketing, I think, is probably the most powerful and important of every sponsor's arsenal, right? When they're out there trying to raise money. So Why don't you kick off and tell me first, or tell my audience first, what actually is email automation?
Or marketing automation.
How's marketing. All right, yeah, fine. I'll stand corrected. Yeah, Go for it. Marketing.
Yeah. So marketing automation is a piece of a larger space, which we call conversion and retention. Right. So if you think about, and we being Swiftpage, focus mainly on the SMB market, and we could talk about how we break down the SMB market.
What's SMB?
Small and medium-sized businesses.
Right.
That's kind of where it is. So if you think of this thing called conversion and retention, let's start with that first. And you look at the market. Everybody in the market needs 4 digital pillars in order to grow their business. We call them presence, traffic, conversion and retention, and optimization tools. Everybody knows what presence is, right? Those are website pages, Facebook pages, landing pages, etc. Then traffic, SEO, SEM, all that other kind of great stuff, drives traffic to your presence. And then what that creates, leads. Then conversion retention is all about converting leads to customers, retaining them and growing them. And then optimization tools are things like financial software, HR software, or whatever. So as a small business, you need to have all 4 of those pillars moving at the same time in order for you to grow. So let's take now conversion and retention. What is that? We believe that the center of the universe of conversion and retention is CRM, customer relationship management. I think everybody kind of knows what that is.
Well, actually, let's not make that assumption. CRM Is that synonymous with the idea of email automation? I know you already corrected me on that concept.
Yeah. Yes and no. It's a piece. So think about email marketing and then marketing automation are all pieces. So if you look at the whole space of conversion retention, there's like 3 or 4 big pieces that make that up. When I say pieces of technology. So customer relationship management, and that's really why we call it center of the universe. That's where you're going to store all of your information about your customers, your contacts, your prospects, all the interactions you've had with them. You can also put in your pipeline, your sales.
Oh, I see.
So that becomes your authoritative source for information.
Okay.
Right. That you will then use for things like marketing automation, which is the other big piece of conversion retention. Maybe even some sales automation, right? So sales automation is when you're kind of looking at your pipeline, your opportunities. It also gets into things that people call, you might hear of what was called CPQ, or configure, price, and quote. That's about, part of sales automation. And then the other big piece of conversion retention is service management. So maybe there's service tickets, or maybe there's field service manager managing a fleet, et cetera. So all that together makes up this thing called conversion retention. With, as a platform, you want to be able to have that all in one, so it's connected, so you're not trying to figure out, what's going on.
Right. Okay.
And so then comes marketing automation, right? Which is, now I've got all this great information in my CRM. And I want to stay connected, and I want to create campaigns, right? And a campaign is like, in your case, with your user base or customers, it's basically saying, hey, listen, I need to go out and raise some money, right? I got this big land development, and I need to go raise $100 million or whatever. Let me go to my CRM and say, who have I connected with in the past that has given me money or been an investor or whatever, or who have maybe I've connected with and wasn't an investor, but I think maybe an investor this time. So now you're going to go into your CRM system, and you're going to say, let me create a group of either existing investors, prospect investors, or just some people that I know that I need to get in hold of. And you create that group, right? And you say, now I want to create a campaign. I'm going to send out, it could be an email message, it could be, maybe a little video or whatever. And I'm going to send some kind of an information to these folks that says, like, hey, I've got this really great opportunity. You need to invest, because if you do, you're going to make a lot of money. All right. And so, so that's what the marketing automation is. So that it helps you to create that. Now, you can go into your marketing automation and create your own stuff, or, if you have a really good tool, it's going to have templates and everything already associated that's really geared towards your industry, so you don't have to do a whole lot of work. Then you send it out, and then you can track what happens to that, right? So you can track this thing like, hey, Adam opened it. John not only opened it, but he clicked through on this stuff. Adam opened it 4 times. Well, he kept going back to it. Why? Because it probably was interesting to him or whatever. So all those statistics come back. Now, here's the key, and this is what your listeners need to keep in mind. When you're talking about a small, medium-sized business, which, even though I would assume, and I maybe shouldn't do this, but the people in your industry, they're probably small businesses. They may raise lots and lots of money, but they're not like thousands of person companies, right? They could be 1 person to 5 to 10 to 15 or whatever. So now, when you're that small, you don't have a data scientist on your staff. You don't have a head of marketing, or you don't have any of that. So what you need to do is make sure that this software works for you, not you having to work for the software. Super, super important point that everybody needs to know. Now, what does that mean? Well, that means if you take the example we were just talking about, okay, I send out an email, right? And then statistics come back. Then what you don't want to have to do is say, oh, let me look at the statistics. Oh, okay, now based on the statistics, I should do this, and then next thing you're trying to do all that. The software should tell you and say, hey, listen, based on what just happened, the software just did this business for you, so I just want to keep you informed.
So what does that mean in terms of an actual email? Let's say I send we have a deal opening next week, right? We're going to be raising $5 million or $10 million, whatever the number is, and I send out an email to 20,000 people. So what will the software be telling me?
So first and foremost, the very, 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 very first thing the software is going to say is, the 20,000, I think you said 20,000, right? The 20,000 emails went out. How many were real email addresses? That's the very first, and which is important in today's day and age. And we'll talk about the 4 C's of information later. The information gets messed up or whatever, you don't have the right email address. So that's what's called a bounce. I don't know if you've ever heard that term, right? So you send out an email and
bounce,
it bounces back, right? And it says, hey, this was not a legitimate email, right? So that the first thing it's going to do is just tell you that, right? And then you're going to say like, well, if 50% of them bounce back, you're like, okay, my data is really messed up, and I need to focus on that. But let's say a large portion of it goes through, then the next thing the software will tell you is how many people even opened it, right? So it's called the open rate, right? And so you'll look at different percentages, and yeah, an open rate, you should get in the 20 to 30% open rate. If you're getting lower than that, that means that 2 things. One is the people that you're sending to are the wrong people, or your what's called a subject line is not interesting enough for people to say like, oh, that's kind of cool. Let me open on that. So that's 2 things. So that's
you guys do split testing, do you? You can do split testing of subject lines.
Yep, A/B. It's what's called A/B testing. Yeah. So that's the beautiful thing about a full marketing automation type of a software is basically saying like, hey, let me try this, let me try this, let me try this. You can put as many as you want, and then you come back and say, oh, okay, these worked, and so now let me do that.
Right.
So now you have who opened it. So now it's important to know that. But then the next thing is normally what you do is you have some kind of a call to action in your message, which means that, hey, you want to learn more? Click here. You want to do click here or whatever. And so now you want to see, did that call to action work, right? And how many people clicked on that? It's called what's called a click through, right? And then normally that lands you into some kind of a landing page or a website or something. Mm-hmm. And so it's going to tell you how many people click through the landing page or the website. Then if you have a real marketing automation system, it's going to do how long did they stay on your website, where did they go, etc. Oh, by the way, I can capture more information about them on the website or whatever. So all of that information comes back, which is super, super important. And then you need to figure out what's called a nurture cycle, right? And so, okay, if I only opened it, I'm going to get put in this path of just open path. If I click through, I'm going to get put in this path. And if I, really spend a lot of time on the website, I'm going to get put on this path. Now, go ahead.
Yeah, so I was going to ask, so let's talk about those paths a little bit. So when you talk about in this path, what you're saying is, correct me if I'm wrong, is that on day one, what I'm going to do as the developer trying to raise capital from people in this, let's use this 20,000 person sample as an example, is I'm going to pre-write all my emails. So I'm going to write a standard email that I may split test or A/B test to my group. And then I'm going to say, if somebody doesn't respond at all or doesn't even open, then I may send this email or this sequence.
Right.
If they do open it, but they don't click, I'll send this next email. If they click, I'll send this email.
Yep.
You write all these emails. If they're super engaged, then they're going to get these 3 emails over a 2-week period. So you pre-author everything, right?
Yeah.
Put it into the system, and then the whole thing just runs automatically.
Exactly, right? So you're creating what's called content, right? And there's a bunch of different content. There's emails that's content. There may be PowerPoint presentations or PDFs or little videos or all kinds of stuff that you create. And that's the beauty of having what I would call one single platform that handles both CRM and marketing automation, right? So because you capture all of this information in one place, and you don't have to go looking for it, right? And say like, oh my gosh, let me go over to this system, pull that, bring it over here. And that's when you're working for the software instead of the software working for you. So you're absolutely right. You have all this content, and there's a couple different ways you can create the content. Or other people can help you create the content, etc. But you have that. Now, when you talk about these paths, you're absolutely right? So a path may be, if I open it and click through, well, I'm going to go into this nurture cycle. Now, the thing your listeners need to think about is that if you have to have a software that you have to manually saying, okay, now, do all this and whatever, boy, that's a lot of work, and it's probably not going to do. So you need to have a platform that has what's called a workflow engine, right? And then you can go in, and it has to be, again, we're dealing with people that are not computer scientists or whatever. So you want to be, it has to be.
We're treating with, if they're anything like I was when I started, we're dealing with technology troglodytes.
That's right. Absolutely. So it needs to be like literally click and drag, and very, very simple. If it's not simple, you're going to say, I can't do it. And next thing you know, it's going to sit on the shelf and you won't use it.
Right.
So anyway, so you set up these workflows, which basically say if somebody just opens it, then the system automatically assemble this content and then send them this content, right? And then you track and see where that goes again. If they opened it up and click through, well then, assemble this content and do this. It may be a quick video on saying like, hey, here's what we're doing. Here's other deals that we've done. This is why you should do it, whatever. We've got a really cool piece of technology, by the way, that enables you that if I send you a video, I can know exactly how long you've watched the video. But here's the more important thing. I could say, if you get to 15 seconds in, I'm going to pop up something and say like, hey, can you give me a little bit more information? Are you interested in this or whatever? So it's called asset tracking. It's really, really, really kind of cool. So that's a bit sophisticated, but it's cool that people can use. And then again, the other path, people assemble that. So then, and again, it's just a matter of what you're trying to do is take your 20,000 and boil that down to the 100 people that you really need to spend your time on, because you can't spend your time on 20,000 people, right? You want to get very quickly down to, these are the 100 people that I think, and of those 100, these 10 I know are going to invest. Boom, done.
Fascinating. Okay, so just for clarification then, forgive me, because I actually contacted you to talk specifically about email marketing and email automation. But from what you've been saying, it sounds like you also manage the entire system, right? The
entire platform.
The entire platform. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
So that I didn't know, forgive me, because again, like I said, I've been hyper focused on your ACT product, which is the email automation product, right? Is that right?
Actually, ACT is the entire platform. So what we have is ACT started out as just CRM, all right? So just customer relationship management, and had a little bit of email marketing hanging off of that. We've now evolved that to what we call ACT Growth Suite, which is CRM and marketing automation full blown in one platform together. Now, why is that important? And because there's so much technology out there, and there's great tools, and some of them are free, and this and that and there. So a lot of small businesses will say, oh, let me try this, let me try this, let me try this. Now the problem is that if I'm trying this little CRM system over here, and I have another little marketing automation system over here, guess what I have to do? I have to extract information from here, and then I have to import it over here, then run what I need to run. Then when all that information comes back, then I need to extract that out of here and then insert it over there. And guess what? Nobody ever does that, and it's a pain in the tuchus, and everybody's like, oh, I can't do it. So So that's why if it's one integrated platform, I just click here, and everything is there, and I don't have to.
All the information is in one place. All right, so let's drill down on a couple of concepts here. So,
Sure.
Gosh, I've got so many things that I want to ask you. So I'm going to backtrack over some of the things that you've said. You've talked about, and these are going to be, from your perspective, fairly basic questions, but I'm going to ask you these basic high-level questions, and then let's drill down a little bit. So one of the concepts that you talked about is creating, and I would like to concentrate on email. If you don't mind, during our conversation, we can definitely come back, talk about the full stack automation another time, if that's okay with you. But from email perspective, when you talk about a campaign, have you seen, so my audience are real estate developers trying to raise money from lists of prospects, right? So let's just assume that they've gathered the email addresses and the names through whatever marketing lead gen that they've got. They've got an email list with a first name.
Right.
and now they want to put out a campaign. So the first question that I have is, when you pre-author a campaign, have you seen any structures that work particularly well, let's say for a launch of a product, or of a, in our case, of a new deal, right, that's coming down the pipe? In other words, a 3-email or a 9-email sequence or something like that, that's just a straight line, irrespective of what you do during it, what a recipient does during.
Yeah, so yes, there's a couple of key things that I think people need to take a look at. Number one, probably the most important thing is getting your subject line correct.
Really?
Right? It's, think about your own inbox, right? I don't know about you. I mean, I get hundreds and hundreds of emails a day, and you just kind of going down real quickly and say delete, 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 delete. So something's got to jump out at you, and that's why it's so important to not just say, hey, let me just go buy a bunch of lists of email addresses and put them in there. If you can have any information about the people that you're doing or sending stuff to, it's really important. So because if somebody's in a certain business or in a certain industry or whatever, you want to get something that's kind of like ticks to them, and says like, oh, okay, this is interesting. Let me do it. So think about yourself and say, what makes you open up an email? Obviously, if it's somebody you're gonna open it up. But if it's not something it's the subject line is interesting. So that's going to be critical, right? And how you do that. Now, if you have a good tool is going to help you to say like, okay, based upon what you're trying to do, here's a couple of examples, and then you can kind of customize it from
right
there. So that's number one. Number two is the body of the actual email or whatever you're sending out is really, really important. Two big key things. Know that your audience is probably not always going to be sitting in front of a laptop or in front of a desktop or something like that and opening this up. They're probably 90% of the time going to open this thing up on a phone, right? So whatever you do, make sure it looks good on a phone, not just looks good on a desktop or laptop. It has to render, a tablet, whatever, and those sort of things. So that's really critical. And the next thing is to when somebody opens it is, where's the best place to put what we call the call to action, the click through. And is it just a link, or is it a box, or whatever? Is it above, what we call above the fold, right? So those type of. So those are the types of things that you need to look at. Now, to somebody maybe in your industry or a landscaper or whatever, they're going to say, I don't know how to do all that, right? So that's when you really need a good tool, and there are a lot of good tools out there. They're going to be pre-populated with a lot of this stuff. They're going to come by industry, and so if you buy a tool and it comes empty, it's not a good tool, type of thing. Because why? This email marketing automation has been around for 15 years, 20, whatever. And so there's people. If you're a good vendor, you're going to be capturing what works, what doesn't work, and then be able to put that back into the tool and say, hey, here's an industry called real estate or land development or whatever, and here's a bunch of pre-populated content that all you have to do is click here and it'll bring your names in, or maybe you can move stuff around very quickly, so you don't have to start from scratch.
So you're talking about the kind of structure of an email rather than the copy itself, presumably.
No, I think it's both structure, and there can be some pre-populated content on saying like for instance, it would be like, hey, and I'll use residential real estate. It's not what it is, but it's a good example. Like, hey, real estate agents that have used this type of copy have gotten the attention of potential home buyers, and this has worked, X percentage of the time. So you boom, okay, this is a good one. Now you may go in and say, I don't like this, and you can change it, but you don't have to start from scratch. I think it's easier to edit than it is to have to come up with this. Now, if you want to start from scratch, no problem. Here's some, a good layout. Put your own content or your own type here, put that there, or whatever. Boom, you put that in, and that's fine. But So it's, a good tool is going to have a lot of stuff that you can, a lot of pre-populated content that you can leverage.
Okay, so one of the things that you said that was very interesting to me was you alluded to buying lists. So how does that work exactly, right? What is and this obviously dovetails into the concept of sending spam and the definitions of spam, right? I mean, I know that if you send something that is of value, it's not technically considered spam, but tell me a little bit about buying lists and best practices for that.
Yeah, so I mean, and there are an enormous amount of what I'll call not so clean lists out there. So you have to be very, very careful. And why is that? Let's start there first, and then we'll turn into, how do you get, because actually buying lists is a good way to go if you do it correctly. But why is it bad? So if somebody just says, hey, I've got, a list of people that have invested in real estate development in the past, here's 50,000 names, and it costs, $1,500. Right? Boom. You say, oh, fantastic. I get that. You do that. And then you say, I'm going to put out a blast email to those 50,000. There's this thing called deliverability. And it's very, very important, right? Because any tool that you use is going to work through a series of server names and domain names and things like along those lines. And there are people that police that, right? And so if you continuously have a high bounce rate, the people who you acquire the tool from are going to come to you and say, I'm cutting you off. You're not allowed to send it. Why? Because it's hurting the vendor's reputation. If the vendor loses their reputation, then they can't send. If they can't send, their business is done, right? So, so that's one. Now, if you say, well, I'm going to go past that, and I'm just going to go into Outlook and just try and send them myself, well, then you'll get blacklisted as well. So what that means is that you'll just get blocked at the server level, and nobody will ever see your emails. So that's why the bounce rate is so important. Now, what you want to do is, if you do buy those lists, first and foremost, you want to make sure that you're not, buying hundreds of thousands, because if you have so many like that, there's a bunch of trash in there. So what you do is do your homework. Go to search the internet, do some stuff, and talk to other people in the industry and say, who has the best data? There are probably, and I don't know your industry very well, so I can't tell you, hey, go here, or there, but there are probably people that do have, clean lists that you can buy that will have a very low bounce rate. And you really want to do your homework before you do that. And then when you do that, you want to test the list. So don't just buy a big list and say, I'm going to go blast it out.
Send just one email, right?
Take a small subset and send it out. And if you get a high bounce rate, say, oh my goodness, I probably got bamboozled on that.
And what about split testing? Let's say you buy a 50,000 name list. What have you seen in terms of best practices for split testing different messages to that list?
Yeah, so I'll answer that in two ways. One is, if it's a list that is clean and you've already purchased before, then I would basically do anything from 15 to 20,000 on one line, 15 to 20,000 on the other line, and maybe a little bit more. If it's a list that you don't know if it's clean or whatever, I'd test it first. I'd take like 2,000, or 3,000, that small number, and test it that way, so that your bounce rate won't be as high, and you won't get in any trouble.
I see. Okay. So what are the best practices then for making sure? Let's say you got a clean list. This is 20,000. Like I've got huge lists of people that I've come to know over my career, as long as it is, when they all converted from faxes to emails, all those folk as well that I know.
Back when they were coming to work in a horse and buggy, right?
Yes, that's right. So what are best practices for getting messages through, even if you know people and you're sending out a broadcast, let's say, to 20,000 people that do know you and do have some kind of relationship with you? Still going to hit these issues, aren't you, John?
Yeah. So a couple of things. I'll talk a little bit, and then I'm going to drive into what I call the 4 C's of information.
That was my next question. It's on the list. Fantastic.
So what I always tell small businesses is just think about how you converse with people you know, and think about how you have an interaction. It's like, hey, Adam, how you doing? That kind of stuff, and how often do you converse with some of your close friends? It's every day. Some of your other people, it's every a couple of months or whatever. So don't just think of that. The only time I'm going to send emails or converse with this group of people is when I want them to invest. That's definitely an important time, but I also want to just keep up and say, hey, let me just tell you what's been going on with us. Keep them close and involved so that when you do send them an email about investment, it's not something like that came out of the blue. It's like, oh man, I haven't heard from Adam in 5 years, and all of a sudden I'm getting.
He's asking me for money.
Yeah.
Exactly right.
So you think about in that way. So now let's drive into the 4 C's of information. This is super, super important for anybody that's using any type of tool. So the first 2 C's are currency and correctness, and they go hand in hand. If your information is not current, it's not going to be correct. And if it's not correct, it's not current. So what does that mean? Well, some people move offices or move house, right? And so they have a different address. Sometimes they move jobs and they have a different email address, whatever. So if you don't have the most current information on that, it's not going to be correct. And guess what? You're not going to be able to converse with them. So you have to, and that's why it's important to keep constant communication, because if you're constantly communicating, you're going to know that Adam moved because you're going to get a bounce back, and you're going to like, wow, Adam must have got a different email address, and what, that's weird. Well, I better go on the LinkedIn and find out where did he go, and then maybe get that so I can clean up my information. So
okay.
2 very, very important: currency and correctness, right? The 3rd C is probably just as important, and that's called consistency. So once you have stuff current and correct, and when you look at consistency, the reason being is that you now probably have information about your customers in multiple places. You have it, if you're lucky enough to have it in a CRM system, that should be your authoritative source. But some people have it in their Outlook contacts, or their Gmail, or they have it in a spreadsheet, or they have it in their their little e-commerce system, or their whatever. There's information all over the place. If it's not consistent, if I don't have the same information, guess what? It's not going to be current. It's not going to be correct. Or I don't know which one is current or correct, right? So you have to have that consistency around there. And then the 4th C, which is probably the most important C, is once it's current and correct and consistent, it has to be complete. Now, complete, everybody kind of misinterprets this. Everybody looks at completeness and says, oh, you know what? Okay, I got to have both addresses and phone numbers, mobile, land, blah, blah, blah. All that's important information. But when I talk about completeness is I have every single interaction that I've ever had with that customer or prospect or lead or contact or whatever, and I have it in one place.
Mm-hmm.
That's complete. I know the last time I talked to them in person. I know the last time I talked to them on the phone. I know how many emails I've sent them. I know when I send them an email, how many times they've opened it, what they've done. I know how many times they've invested, what they've invested, how many, what kind of return I gave them. Are they happy with me or do they hate me? It's that type.
Right.
That's completeness, right? And so if you really going at that, the very first thing you need to do before you start emailing and all that other kind of stuff, work on the 4 C's of information. That will make you so much more positive in your results as you go forward.
John, thanks so much. So let me ask you one really practical question before I roll into my 3 sign-off questions, if that's
okay.
So practical question. So you talked about cleaning up information, staying current, right? This is really current and correct. Very important. Totally agree with you. I guard my list very, very carefully. And one of the issues that I have, especially if I haven't communicated with it for a while, and there was a period back there where I was undercover as I was figuring out all this tech stuff 3 years ago. When I hit my list the first time, there was a lot of bounce backs and a lot of undeliverables and bad email addresses. So actually, are there any automation tools that will allow you to update those, or do you have to do it manually?
No, good question. There are a lot of tools out there. There are things, there's a couple of ones that are there's a company called Full Contact that will help you out there. Circle Back is another one. I mean, if you just do a search on the internet and say like, hey, how can I get my information clean? And what these do is they'll go out, you'll say, here's what the information I had before, and they'll go out, they'll kind of comb through the internet and they'll find some current information and update it for you. They're relatively cheap. They're a great thing to have, and you should absolutely look at investing.
Use those kinds of tools. Yeah. All right, John. So let me ask you 3 sign-off questions. I could sit here and talk with you all day. I think this is the core of any real estate syndication effort is everything we're talking about. So we really could talk a long time. But let me ask you 3 sign-off questions.
Yeah.
What is the most important thing you think someone starting out raising money online for real estate development should keep in mind?
Oh boy, that's a good question. But I would say that the very first thing you need to do is create what I would call just what is your plan of attack, right? And so how do you want to do this? Do you want to be broad based and go after everybody, or do you want to get very specific? And so the more that you can lay out exactly what you do, why you're going to, is that important in my mind, because that will then dictate what type of tools you're going to need, what type of content you're going to need, etc. I think if you try and do it on the fly and say, hey, let me send out an email first, and all of a sudden you get all these people, oh my God, okay, now what do I do? I have to think it out first. You can change it as you go forward, but make sure you have a plan of attack before you get going.
Perfect. Second question. What's been the hardest lesson you've learned online?
Oh, hardest lesson I've learned personally or from a business?
Yeah, either way you want to answer. But yeah, personally, I'm interested in personal experience.
I think, and this is one that probably everybody deals with. You make the mistake of clicking on something and you don't realize that it's not, and then you just like all of a sudden you're on some other list and you got and then you have to spend an enormous amount of time. What everybody needs to know, go all the way down to the bottom. There's this little tiny thing. Everybody has to have it. It's called unsubscribe, right? And then you have to go in and you have to unsubscribe it, and it's just such a pain in the rear end. So really be, I've learned to be very, very selective on what emails I even just open up.
That's very interesting, actually. I subscribe to everything because I like to see how people's funnels are built. Mm-hmm. And I'm also slightly suspicious these days of that unsubscribe button. If I don't know who it's from, I don't want to be clicking on something that's downloading something untoward. But anyway, I'm just paranoid.
But that's a good point too. I mean, everybody has, you have to be careful for sure.
All right. So my last question of the 3. What are your personal key daily habits that make you successful in the online world?
Yeah, so I live my life according to 3 things. It's courage, passion, and tenacity. And so, I wake up every day and say, listen, today is probably not going to be what I thought it was going to be. If you think you've got your day all planned out, I know as running a company, and I've run very large companies, small companies, etc. You never know what your day is going to be like. So you have to have the courage to be able to go after what you want to do, courage to live every single day to its fullest, right? And it's not just something you do. And then if you do that, you got to have passion, right? You can't come in and say like, oh, I'm going to do this today or whatever. Come on, man, we're alive. We're above ground. This is fantastic. Passion. And then you know what? Stuff is not going to always go the way it is. You're going to have setbacks or whatever. If you don't have tenacity, it's going to come back to bite you. So that's the way I live my life: courage, passion, and tenacity. That's what we try and tell all of our small businesses that we deal with. That's what I tell all my team. We're Swiftpage. We call ourselves Swifties. So all the Swifties and Swiftpage Nation, live your life every single day with courage, passion, and tenacity.
John, what fabulous words of advice. Thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. It was a great pleasure meeting you.
Very nice meeting you as well. I had a lot of fun. Thank you for having me.
That was President and CEO of Swiftpage, John Oechsle. I love automated email systems. Right? It makes all the sense in the world to me to use them. And I particularly like being able to track opens and clicks and to create hot lists of the most engaged recipients from that data. It is a phenomenally powerful tool. Remember, you can learn the exact system used by the top real estate syndicators raising capital online by going to the podcast page at gowercrowd.com and watching the exclusive whiteboard workshop that I put there for you, where you'll see the entire digital marketing system for raising money online and how automated email fits into that. That's all at gowercrowd.com. Hey, thank you for listening. And thank you, John Oechsle, President and CEO at Swiftpage. That's all for this episode. I'll see you next time. And for now, this is Dr. Adam Gower signing off.